I can't tell you how good it is to be home, even if it's just for 2 days before we head back. And as I was looking around, I feel really safe in here today. It wasn't but about a month ago with an incident happening, we didn't feel quite that way. And y'all, let me touch on that just for a minute, and I'll try not to cry this time, okay? Because it's an illustration of just how divided we've become as a nation. And we've been divided like this before, ideologically separated, but never has that chasm, that gap between different ideologies has been as broad as it is today. If you go back in history, John Adams even wrote once that General George Washington should be shot for his cowardice. He wrote that. It wasn't well publicized. Why? Because the media had a little bit of sense of responsibility. And he was speaking out of emotion. I've actually gone through and read to some groups before some of the comments that were made about George Washington through the Revolutionary War. I didn't tell them what it was. I said, he should be shot. He should be immediately removed from office. We're tired of retreating. We need to advance. And I asked somebody, I said, what is that? Somebody said, oh, it's your Facebook post. I said, no, actually, these were comments that were made again about George Washington. Now, of course, there was a coming together because they were all on the same side. And they knew that you can't win a war through friendly fire. And there was a coming together because Washington was there. He was seeing the force that he was up against. He was analyzing, and he knew that he had to win a long-term war, not a short-term battle. That different from sporting events, wars are not won by who wins the most battles. It's the one that has the fortitude and the armament and the people at the end to see it through. Throughout the Revolution, we lost more wars than we won. Even after the turning point, Valley Forge, we still lost more battles than we won. But we won in the end because we came together as a country and we were unified behind one common cause, which was liberty. Today we see an interesting element taking force, or a dynamic that's taking force all across the nation. Because for 8 years, Republicans are pretty much united. Well, at least for 6 of those 8 years, we were pretty much united in the fact that our nation was going in the opposite direction than what we thought it should go in. Our founders intended it to go in. And we unified around negative messaging. Not as a group, not hateful messaging, but negative messaging is that direction is not working. We have to change that course. We have to do something different. Now that we've been given the tools to work with, sometimes we're having a hard time changing that message. It's still negative. And what's happened is even our own messaging has become negative against our own selves, and a lot of it is monetarily driven. If you ever, I'll give you an illustration here in a few minutes of one about me that was totally false, that came from a conservative group that basically said I said something I didn't say, and you should call his office right now. But before you do that, click the donate here button. We're having a hard time transitioning over to the enemy we should be fighting against is a far left ideology. It's not a person, it's not people, but it's an ideology that is totally contrary to that for which our nation was founded, and our nation as it was designed cannot exist under that ideology. That's where our battle really is. But some of that has grown to the point, even if you look at the chasm that exists between Americans at this point, not all, Look, your mainstream Americans that are out there, when I'm in the district, we're out everywhere. And everywhere that we go, people are like, you guys keep doing what you're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep pushing, keep pushing. When it comes to healthcare, we really don't care what you do at this point. Just repeal and do something. Repeal part of it, do something. We just have to fix the problem. We don't care how you do it, just do it. That's the majority of what we're getting, but there's the vocal groups out there, those that are involved, that chasm is so large that there is nothing that brings us together. There's nothing. In fact, I was speaking on a bill on the House floor not too long ago. It was a financial services bill. It was one of these weedy subjects that nobody is going to write about except for the Financial Times, but it has a major impact on people. It's a banking regulation. The Republican that was speaking, the Republican speaks and the Democrat speaks, and we're going back and forth in the debate. The gentleman speaking before I got up, the Republican, he said, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, I'm standing here and I'm debating with my colleagues on the other side who are painting this legislation as the worst thing that could ever happen to America. But the fact is, last year they introduced the exact same bill. But they're opposing it. Why? Because it's a Republican piece of legislation. When you look at the direction that we're going in our nation, we need to get some things done, a bipartisan coming together. But we have to start closing that ideological gap that exists, not by moving ourselves, but there are people in the Democrat Party that agree with us with a lot of things, but they're scared to death to vote with us. Now, part of that is just the messaging that is out there. I said this the other day on CNN, and the media absolutely went nuts. So I was talking about the guy who was shooting bullets at me a few weeks earlier, and I referred to him as a citizen who was radicalized by the far left, and they absolutely went nuts because you're not supposed to use radicalized when it comes to the left. That's a word that they adopted on the right, right? Flag Day is now one of those days for me that'll be like Pearl Harbor Day. One that you never forget where you were. Of course, I'm not aging myself, guys. I wasn't there when Pearl Harbor happened. So my dad would tell you about it, but the day of 9/11, you never forget what you were doing. It was just a normal day. We got up at 5:30 in the morning, was getting dressed. We practiced baseball early in the morning. Let me ask you this. How many of you have heard of the congressional baseball game? How many of you have heard of the congressional baseball game last year? Those that knew me, because I've been playing ever since I've been in Congress. And it's a charity game. We play in the National Stadium. It's the Major League Baseball experience. The first year we played, I think we had 10,000 in attendance, Desiree. Desiree remembers it by what the temperature was that day. The first year was 95. Last year was only 91. So we play in late June or early July. But we had 10,000 attendance. We raised near $500,000 for charities. And that's bipartisan. This is one of the things that we do come together on. Last year, we raised about $500,000. Again, we had 12,000 attendance. It's the largest we'd ever had. This year, they sold out the 20,000 tickets the Washington Nationals have allotted, and about 3 hours before the game opened up 5,000 more and sold those out. We raised $1.6 million. Why? Because of awareness was raised. This was our last practice. This is Wednesday. The game is on Thursday. And I'll tell you this, if you guys 100% buy into this idea of separation of church and state, you may want to leave now. Because I'm going to tell you God was in the field. You can tell me all that you want to, and I can tell you there was miracles happened on that field that day. I got the field around 6-ish. When we pulled in, Rob, most of you know Rob Ackers, my chief of staff, he actually drove me that day, which he wasn't going to. I borrowed his car, and another little miracle aspect of it. A couple of practices before that, I noticed I was stumbling a little bit as I was running. is going on. Sometimes we'll play at we'll practice at the Nationals practice field, and that's all AstroTurf. But normally practice at this ball field that's in a park. It's like going to Dellinger Park, a little bit smaller, but it has a playground, a dog walk park, has 2 baseball fields. We play on the larger adult field that's right up front. But I noticed I was stumbling. Well, the day before practice, I happened to glance down and I started seeing sock through the side of my cleat. My cleats were coming apart. That's why I was stumbling, and I'm thinking, okay, I need to go get shoe goo, fix this for tomorrow. Fiscal conservative, I can make it one more game with these cleats. Rob looks at me and says, you were not going on the field with those. So Desiree and I had to go get some new cleats. It's a good thing I wasn't stumbling when all this started happening, and I'd say, hey, that was a good time for cleats to blow out. But we had borrowed Rob's car to go find some cleats there in Washington, bought a new set of cleats, and I was just going to drive myself, but Rob wanted to drive that morning. Last practice, he wanted to get a few more pictures. As I'm getting ready to go, the first game that we ever played, that I played, Kennesaw State University baseball team made me a uniform. An honorary member of their team had my name on the back. It's bright yellow. Like there's like a bumblebee, but it's just bright yellow jersey. Last year, the Atlanta Braves made a jersey for me, a uniform. So I wore a Braves uniform last year, and I wore it this year, being the first year that they were in our district. And so I hadn't worn the Kennesaw State University jersey to practice yet, last practice, and I thought, let me just put that on. So I grab it. As we pull into the field, Rob pulls up and he goes to park down the third baseline. When you go in the field, when you go in the park, the field's kind of sitting like this with home plate here. You can drive up this way and park, you can drive to the right and park along the first baseline. So Rob pulls up the third baseline, and for some reason, I just get this feeling that this is a bad idea. I don't know why. I said, Rob, why don't you park around over here? And he looked at me like, when have you ever cared where I park? I'm one of these guys that'll drive my wife crazy, because if I pull into Walmart, I go to the first parking spot. It doesn't matter if it's all the way back at the gas pumps. It was the first one I saw. I'm going to walk in, right? So it doesn't matter to me, but I really felt like he shouldn't park there. So he parked over on the third base side, which is about, 20 yards, 30 yards from the fence line of the first base line. I get out, go in the dugout. Since I'm designated here, I spend most of my time in the cage. We did a little outfield. We didn't have as many players as we normally have because it's the day before the game. And a lot of guys, especially our pitchers, will rest. We did have some come out and just warm up, and then they had left early. Some of the players other players were leaving early. I was somewhat surprised that Steve Scalise was there, being our whip. We were really busy, and he doesn't make every practice, but he makes most of them. But because he was there, we did have a security detail of 2 officers. So anyhow, I spent most of my time in the cage. Rand Paul and I were out in the cage to start with. The Democrats pitcher throws 80 miles an hour. He's really good. He plays semi-pro ball. Our pitching machine had broken 4 weeks earlier. And because we're fiscal conservatives, we all decided to try to fix it ourselves instead of just pull in and buy another one, right? So it had been down for most of last probably 4 weeks. They had just got it fixed. And you should never fix a pitching machine yourself, because this thing was throwing incredibly wild. But they had it dialed up to 85 miles an hour. If you're not used to hitting a baseball that fast, you don't get the bat far enough around on it, it's going to hit the handle. Guess what happens? It hurts. To the point, Rand Paul threw the bat down and said, I'm done. He just kept doing this. He ended up coming back out a little bit later. But anyhow, we spent some time in the cage. I did 3 rounds of hitting in the cage, and I went back onto the field because we were doing live pitching there. We had a pitcher on the mound who was throwing, a staff member. We have several staff members. Some of them are actual staff members, members of Congress. Some of them are actually lobbyists, that Republicans. They come out and help them. Some of them have played baseball before. But we had a full set of players out in the field. Most in the outfield were staff members. We had our members of Congress, only the members of Congress could play in the game, but we had the full infield, and we had a little congregation of folks standing by home plate getting ready to go bat. I ran out, put on a batting helmet, was just about to put my batting gloves on and grab a bat when I heard a shot. Now, I'm standing on the first base side of home plate, and I hear the shot come from over around the third base area. It was sound like more in the parking lot. There's a YMCA across the street, and I'm thinking, that was a gunshot. I knew it was a gunshot. It was familiar. I could tell it wasn't an AR, but it wasn't a pistol either. It was louder, it was sharper, but it wasn't a 30-06. So I'm processing. I mean, my mind is processing. I'm analyzing. I'm an analytical guy. And I'm sitting there trying to figure out what that was. And then I started thinking, should I be concerned at this point? In Cartersville, I wouldn't be concerned one bit, okay? Especially where I live, people are target practicing all the time out there. This is in Alexandria, Virginia. So let me look over at the Scalisa security detail and see what they're doing. So I looked over to them, and they were over parked. Their SUV was parked just outside the first base dugout. They were both security detail officers were getting out of the car with quizzical looks on their face. Not concerned, but like, okay, what was that? I turned to look back down the baseline again. And that's when Trent Kelly, Mississippi, hollered, "He's got a gun, run." And so we all started running toward the first base side. Now, he was standing at the, had stuck his gun through the gate, which was locked. The only reason that gate was locked is the night before, the groundskeeper, Yesterday and I went to the field the Monday after the shooting. I went to show her where it was all at. The groundskeeper we ran into there, he said, Tuesday night, I just had this feeling like we should lock all the gates. So I called, and I had one of the employees go and lock that third base gate with a chain. Had that had been locked, he would have been right out on the field. It would have been a massacre. That's another God thing. But he had stuck his gun through the gate and started selectively shooting. Now, some people have heard this guy was a bad shot. Let me tell you what, this guy hit 3 people on the run while shooting through a gap in a gate this big. If you watch the video on YouTube, just listen to his shots. He was selecting, so he wasn't just filling the air with lead. He was shooting at people. One of the reasons I know that, my bright yellow jersey made for a pretty obvious target, and I'm probably the largest target on the team. As I was running up the first baseline to get out the gate, bullets were hitting the ground. I could see the ground exploding to my left and right. A lot of guys went in the dugout. I went behind a shed building, just a wooden shed. I knew it wasn't going to stop a rifle round, but I was looking for concealment just to hide myself, see where the shooter actually is, and then plan a plot a course to get out of there. When I came around the corner of the shed, my plans changed. There's a life lesson in this too. We get in our mind that this is the right thing to do. This is the direction I'm going. The right thing to do is you got a guy that's over here that's shooting at you. The best thing to do is get way over there behind something solid. And there was a concrete building, a bath building, and I'm thinking, let me stage myself there, get to a tree, and then get out there. When I rounded the corner, I looked, and about 10 feet in front of the shed was Matt Micah, one of our staff members. He was totally covered in blood, laying on his back. Instinctively, I ran to him. Now, what I didn't know is the shooter was moving down the third baseline behind home plate and was coming up to shoot directly where I was at. But when I saw Matt, I got close enough to him to see he had a hole in his chest, about this big. He had been shot in the back as he was running off the field. The bullet came out of his chest. And he had walked himself over and laid there because he was laying beside the Capitol Police SUV. And so I got close to him. Another gentleman with me, other staff member, Brian Kelly, hollered for me to get back. As I started coming back, I heard shots going. They were hitting the shed next to me, to hitting the ground, because he could see this bright yellow jersey. Brian saved my life at that point, but I was frustrated because I couldn't get him out. So Brian and I made the decision there. We were going to stay and get everybody else out of there. So Brian watched the shooter, and I'm talking to Matt, because to be quite honest with you, I didn't think he was going to live. As much blood as he had lost, the size of the hole in his chest, I didn't think that he was going to make it. And I thought, if I'm going to go into eternity, I want to know that there's somebody there. And I didn't know the status of him, his heart, his salvation. But I'm going to talk to him, and I'm going to witness to it while we're there. And so I stayed just talking to Matt. Brian's watching the shooter. As the shooter comes around, and this is kind of what I want to explain, because a lot of people envision there's a guy shooting on the baseball field for 8 minutes. He wasn't. He probably shot out on the field for 2 minutes, probably shot about 20 rounds. All in all, he shot 70 rounds with his SKS rifle. Most of what happened in the shooting was when he moved down behind home plate, he knew there were a lot of guys in the dugout and started trying to shoot down into the dugout. See, his objective was to kill Republicans. He wanted to kill Republicans. He was radicalized. There was a lady about 30 yards to my left who had been there walking her dogs, who was laying on top of her dogs. Quite frankly, guys, I'm sorry, but I would have flipped it over the other way. But she was laying on those dogs screaming, help me, help me, help me. And he never took a shot, and she was in the wide open. He could have shot her in a heartbeat, never took one shot. The only shots he shot in her direction was when he was trying to hit the Capitol Police officer. But the majority of the gunfight that day, the majority of the rounds he shot was in about a 40-yard distance from where I was to where he was, in a direct line, and the only thing between us was this Ford Expedition. And as I'm there, as I come around, as I back up after I see Matt, I see the female officer, she's on the radio, calling for help. David Bailey, the male officer, was around the back corner, and he's trying to see where the shooter is. Brian Kelly, the guy with me, is hollering the direction. It's telling him what he's wearing. He can see the shooter. I'm still talking to Matt. I can hear Brian telling him the direction, and you can, if you watch the video, you can hear Brian hollering the direction. He'll occasionally will tell other guys to get down, get down. They're trying to run away. But then David Bailey sees where the shooter is, and he tells Crystal, get around the car. So she jumps out the driver's side, which was side toward the shooter, and she runs around the back. As he comes, and he was calm, cool, and collected the whole time. He never acted stressed. He knew what he was doing. He had ran this thing out in his mind. He had been out there. He had scoped out our field for a month. He knew when we were practicing. He knew who was going to be there, and had an assassination list in his pocket with descriptions of the people. But that day, he wasn't necessarily going after those, because more than half of those on his list didn't even play baseball, but he knew who was on the team. But he's just started trying to shoot us. As 8 minutes turns into 8 years, and something like that, I knew that the only thing that was between us and disaster were those two Capitol Police officers. At one point, David Bailey, well, prior to that, I'm watching Matt. Matt's laying right next to the SUV. And I knew Matt was still alive, because every now and then he'd take his hands and put them on his head like this, and then he'd put them back down. He told me later he was trying to breathe. That's what why he put his hands up there. But I started to stand up one time to see where the shooter was, and Brian told me to get down. Before I could get down, apparently, I didn't know this at the time, because Brian told me later, he said, man, you didn't even flinch when that bullet hit about 8 inches from your head. So no wonder you didn't flinch. But he would see that yellow jersey, and apparently that the only time he'd disengage from the Capitol Police would be to turn and shoot at us. Or actually, he would quit shooting at us to shoot the Capitol Police when they were shooting at him. But he would put himself in a position to guard where it was hard for them to shoot, because there was a concrete building there that he was beside, and it was hard for them to get an angle. And so he would take advantage of that and shoot our way. And my wife went over the shed, and one of the two things that amazed her, how close everything was. And how many bullet holes were in the side of that shed right next to where I was standing. Because the shed was no longer covered for me, because I'm beside it and he's directly in front of it. The only thing between us is that SUV. And from my position and from where he was, I just had the hood of the SUV. So if I stood up, he'd have a clear shot. He then turned and he moved to the other side of the building and started trying to shoot under the SUV. This is how desperate he was to kill somebody. He was trying to get to us underneath the SUV. At one point, I saw the female officer, bullet went through both tires and through her ankle, and she was taken out. And that was as far as from me to the door right there. And she goes down. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, this is not going very well at this point. Now we have one gun out, and David has shot a whole lot of rounds. And I don't even know how many he's carrying, but he has shot a lot. At that point, David realized he's got to get away from the SUV to draw fire away from us, and to get a better angle. So he actually goes out into the parking lot. And I'm talking to Matt, and I'm watching David talking to Matt, trying to count how I quit listening to the shooter's gunshots because the bullets were hitting the ground before we even hear the shot at that point. So I'm like, it doesn't matter to listen for a shot because it's too late to shoot the shot. And there was nothing I could do. I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to leave Matt. And so why think about it? Just focus on your cause. Focus for why you're here. Don't pay attention to circumstances, what's going on. Just focus on why you're here. I saw Matt, as he was laying there, he kind of flinched like he was trying to roll over to his side. Why does he all of a sudden do that? And he just flopped back over. It's because the shooter shot into the SUV and shot him in the arm. Now he's been shot twice. I at this point didn't know that Steve Scalise had been hit. I didn't know that the other staff member had been hit running off the field. Because as I was running off, Steve was off to my left. But he had probably one of the first 3 bullets he shot actually hit Steve Scalise in the hip. Steve actually drug himself with his hands out into the outfield trying to get away from the shooter. But I could tell you shot by shot of what was going on, but in the end, I could hear sirens coming. EMTs actually got there before the police. When Alexandria police showed up, I think they were responding to just gunshots fired because the female officer that got out comes walking down the parking lot. We're telling her, get down, get down, get down. The guy turns around, he shoots one at her, misses. It could have probably only missed her by that far. Blew out the window of the car she was next to. Then she jumps down and gets on the radio, and she's screaming at this point, we have active shooter. In fact, David Bailey at one point, it was amazing. He's shooting with his left hand and trying to dial his cell phone to dial for more help with his right hand. And he showed me a picture of his cell phone. Bullet hit his cell phone and deflected away from him. I didn't even know this when I spoke at church last week. I talked to David on the phone this week. But it was very courageous what he was doing. He had an officer down, he's in the parking lot, and then at the end, for some reason, the guy, I thought maybe ran out of ammo, but for some reason, they said he still had plenty of ammo. He fired 70 rounds, still had plenty of ammo for his SKS. He just laid it down, walked around the other side of the building and came out with a 9mm handgun, just as calm and casual, just pointing at and shooting. And it was just like an old Wild West shootout. David Bailey just walked out and stood there, and they got into this gunfight. Now, from my appearance, I could see him, I could see David, and I saw him get hit. Of course, as this is going on, the 2 Alexandria police officers and David Bailey are hollering to him, drop your weapon, drop your weapon. At the same time, I'm hollering, just shoot him. It turned out I'm not the only one hollering at. There's several saying, just shoot him. And so finally I see him get hit, and then he kind of stumbles again and he falls on the ground. As it turned out, I was wrong. It was actually the Alexandria police officers that took him down with an AR. It was 2 rifle shots brought him down. But this is kind of where we've got that where our emotions get so involved that they defy logic. Our nation is a land of freedom, which is the right to life. It's one of those key issues. And my mind, I never got scared. I never got nervous. In fact, it kind of scared me. I was telling somebody later, I said, look, my blood pressure didn't go up, my pulse rate didn't go up. I was just processing. It was like a supercomputer. That's why it seems like slow motion, because things were running through your mind so fast. And I remember one time I thought, I hope Rob's all right. Now, Rob, it's interesting. If Rob had parked where he was originally going to park, he wouldn't be with us today. He would have been about 10 feet from where the gunman was actively shooting, and he would have had no escape route. Where Rob ended up parking, he was able to get out to the street behind the line of cars, and he watched the whole thing between going on. You can see me, you can see the gunman. He was a little mad at me when he got over there. But then he said, don't ever run to the gunfire again. You run away from it. But that was where God needed me to be at that time. When they took the shooter down, I ran up to Matt and I again started thinking, what can I do? I don't want to put pressure on his wound because I don't know what else is going on. He had broken ribs. It could have hit his spine. I could do more damage. I know one thing I can do that will help. I just laid my hand on his head and I prayed out loud, kneeling in his pool of blood in the dirt there. When I got done, I looked and he opened his eyes and he looked at me. And I looked at the Capitol police officer sitting right next to her, literally her ankles right next to my leg, and I said, "Where are you hit?" I knew where she was hit, but I wanted to see her response. She said, "Right by your hand there." And I looked and the side of her boot was blown out. I could tell, okay, getting shot will ruin your day, but she wasn't critical. Matt was in really bad shape. So I asked if she had a med kit. I went and got her medical kit out of the back of the car, and I came over and I started looking for some quick clot. By the time I got into the medical bag, the EMTs were already there. So I jumped up, and that's when I heard that Steve had been shot out on the field. So I ran the med kit out there, and we have a doctor, Brad Winstrup. We have two physicians on the team, Brad Winstrup and Paul. Both of them were in the batting cage. When it all started, Brad ran behind the concrete building, and he stayed because he knew he could probably need to be able to help. He told me later he's been in Afghanistan. He said, "I've been in this situation before, but always had a way of shooting back." Told the media later, I said, "Never want to be in a gunfight again, but if I am, I want to be able to shoot back." I got a call from the speaker that evening. I told him I'm not going to do any press. I'm not politicizing this thing. I want to know how everybody's doing because I didn't think Matt was still going to make it. But I started realizing everybody who was out there on the press, they weren't on the field. They had either left. Some of them were already back at the Capitol. I didn't get back to the Capitol until 10:30. And I criticize them, but they're telling a story, and I was there, and nobody was talking about God being on the field right now. So I finally, about noon, said, "Look, I'll just start doing it." How many interviews did we do? 35, you said? 35 interviews the rest of that day? I never quit sweating from the adrenaline. I mean, it was just an incredible thing. But about 4:30 that afternoon, we assembled in the House floor. They canceled everything for the day. The speaker came out and gave his incredible speech. You attack on one of us is attack on all of them. And afterwards, I gave him my account because Brad and I were the two that were right there and saw most everything. And so I told him that I was really, really concerned that Matt Micah wasn't going to make it. We all thought that Steve wouldn't be quite as bad, but what happened, Matt had an exit wound, Steve did. Scalise did. The bullet exploded inside of him. It caused a lot of damage. That's why he's still in the hospital. Doing much better. But about 4:30, the speaker called me and he said, "I just want to give you an update on Matt." And I thought he was going to tell me he passed away. He said, "I just want to tell you something. Matt's a miracle. He's going to be fine." Actually, the gunshot in his arm did more damage than the gunshot that went through his chest. Missed his spine, missed his heart, nicked a lung, that's why he's having a hard time breathing, and shattered 3 ribs. I got to visit Matt in the hospital the day before they leave, at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. He was out of the hospital pretty quick. But as that shooter was shooting, and he's killing us, as my mind is processing, the thought in my mind was, this guy's probably pro-choice. Does that play in? I mean, this is just some of the things that my mind is thinking as I'm going through. You know, what is this ideological difference that would drive someone to take life like this? Is it a pro-life issue? Well, with him, it was Obamacare. So we got to figure out, how do we come together as a nation? Because something else I realized while all this is going on, it's hard to swallow at the time, but God loved that guy just as much as he does me. The Constitution guarantees his liberty just as much as it does me. But how do we bring this thing together? We don't back down on the direction we're going. We have to better communicate what's going on. Now, I spent enough time talking about a shooting, but I think it's important for people to understand, because everywhere I talk, people really don't understand what's good. For instance, I was talking about earlier. When I'm doing a media interview afterwards, people are asking what's going on, and it wasn't but about the fifth or sixth interview when the gun issue came up. Gun control. In fact, a Democrat who was not on the field, who probably has never held a gun in his life, was on the television just before me talking about, now this is illustration why we need gun control. So I go on right after him and I said, let me tell you what, you want to talk about gun control? When you've been shot at close range with a high-powered rifle multiple times with no way shooting back, then come talk to me about gun control. But until you've been in that situation, I don't think you're an expert at it. And then I went on to say, look, the bad people are going to have the guns. This guy was willing to commit a capital offense, which means for what he was trying to do, he would be executed. Do you think he really cared what the law said about guns? Let's be clear. Murder is illegal. The guy was trying to commit murder. He could care less about a misdemeanor gun charge or even a felony gun charge. The bad people are going to have guns. The idea of the Second Amendment is so we will have guns to defend ourselves. That didn't go over well with the liberal media, but then I went on, they said, what about your protection? And I said, statement I made earlier, if I ever get into a gunfight again, which I don't want to, but if I do, I want to have a way of fighting back. We need, now what I was referring to is the District of Columbia, because in Virginia, I could carry a gun. Where our practice was, I could carry a gun, but not in the District of Columbia, where my apartment is and where I work. So what do I do with it? So the point is, these laws in District of Columbia, we have to address those. I said, I'm no better than anybody else, but clearly I'm a target. I'm a target. I have to have a way of defending myself. And we have to address that. That statement turned into, I wanted to allow congressmen to carry weapons and nobody else. In fact, I pitched the reciprocity bill that I'm a co-sponsor of, which would just basically give reciprocity of any state that has carry with any other state. Now, that still doesn't resolve our problem because there are some states that you can just carry. You don't have a license. Well, then that poses a problem because they don't have a license to have reciprocity with another state. So there's some things that we have to work on, and it's not clear that it would affect DC because DC is not a state. It's a federal district. Anyhow, a pro-gun group sent out an email by the end of the week basically saying, I don't support gun rights because I want congressmen to carry and not anybody else. In fact, I read an article the other day that says, I introduced a bill. Somebody came up to me the other day and said, I'm really upset with you for introducing that language to, so only congressmen can carry guns. I was like, what bill? You know what bill? The one you introduced. I said, introduced the bill. Yes, you did. Okay, folks, there's fake news on both sides, okay? But what that illustrates is we had this moment, and I'm not trying to minimalize that shooting, but we had a moment, the potential to bring all of us together. And it didn't take but about 48 to 72 hours for the left to go right back where they were, and the right to divide ourselves again and start philosophically shooting at our own. We got to bring this thing together. So